Let's now look at memoization. In particular, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create ourselves an application, and this application, we're going to have a couple things. So we're going to have a little text input field. And we're going to calculate Fibonacci numbers. Okay. And we're going to have a fib component. And let's just test this right now. Let's just try and calculate the third Fibonacci. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to return a Fibonacci number. So to begin with, let's just hard code this. Let's just say, yes, every Fibonacci number is 3. And let's just see what this looks like. So we see our 3 here, but we don't know quite where our input is. The problem is this isn't a type. This is an input. Type equals text. Let's try that one. That one's much better. Okay, so that's crazy. All right. So let's actually calculate Fibonacci. So we're going to go ahead and have a stupid version of Fibonacci. And we'll see why in a bit. So we'll take n, and basic will say if n is less than or equal to 0, we'll return 0. Else if, let's say, n equals 1, we'll return 1. Otherwise, we'll return nth fib of n minus 1 plus nth fib of n minus 2. So this is, an exponential approach to calculating this. It's crazy, but we actually want to do this for a reason. We'll see in a moment. So we're going to calculate the n Fibonacci of the props.n, right? So n is going to be 3, so this should return the third Fibonacci, right? The first 2, so it's 0, 1, 1, so it should be 1. Let's remove that warning. It's 2, so let's think about this. I'm saying the 0th Fibonacci, okay, so it's 0 for 0 and then 1, 1, 2, fine. And so if we look at, let's say, 5. Okay, it's 5. So now what I want to do is actually be able to type the Fibonacci number I want in here. Okay, so I want to be able to change what this value is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some state here, right? My state is going to be, let's say, import. So I'm going to need some state information and import that from React. So I'm going to have a constant. Let me also use the command option L, right, which is this reformat code, is nice to affect things. So we want to do n set n equals use state. And the initial state we want to do is, let's just make it 3, like we had it. Okay. And this needs to be an array syntax here. All right. And in fact, we don't need these parens here. We'll just put this up like this. Okay. So this in here is going to be n, and here we want the value to be equal to n. So let's try this. And so what do we have here? So basically the value here is 3, and the third Fibonacci is 2. If we change this to 5, we can't change it to 5. Why can't we change it to 5? So let's think about that. The reason we can't change it to 5 is, let's look at our console. It says all this stuff about controlled components. Basically, what's happening is we don't have an Unchange, so we're not being notified of any change here. Although I can't type, and I'm still a little confused about that. So let's try putting in an Onchange. So we're going to put in an Onchange. What are we going to do when we get a change? Well, we get past E, and what are we going to do? We are going to call set n. What are we going to set n on? We're going to set the value that's in our input field. So let's just think about that. It's going to be E dot target dot value. Okay, and that's going to be a string, and so we want to convert that to an integer. And we do that with parseInt. So let's pull this out into a function so we can see it a little easier. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and have a function that handles a change. And what are we going to do? Instead of call it handle change, let's just call it handle change of n, because that's really kind of what it is. And we want to take the e.target.value. Let's just make sure we see what that is. I almost always, when I'm logging, put some sort of a header to know where I am, because otherwise I just get these random values that get printed out. It's kind of useless. Okay, and so let's now say our new n is going to be parse int of e.target.value, and then we provide the exponent, the base, sorry, that we want to be using. Once we have that, then we can set in. Let's try this. Okay, so 35th, not exactly what I expected, but the 35th Fibonacci is that. Let's just say 5. 5th Fibonacci is that, 8. So what happened there? I actually hit return. So let's kind of look in the console and see what happened. So we got an infinite loop. Why? Because handle change of n, we have no value. We got not a number. So that's no good. So let's just, so we can just check if it's not a number. And we'll just set it to 0. Whoops. And of course we need parens because this is JavaScript AC-like language. So if we just delete that, we're going to just get 0. So we do 5, that's fine. We do 3, that's fine. We do 35, okay. Let's do 38. 38 takes a while. Interesting. So 38 is somewhat slow to compute. Let's do another change. So let's go ahead and in our fib here, let's go ahead and just say something like this. So the nth fib is this. Yeah, okay. Now let's do one more thing. I want to add a checkbox here. And the checkbox is going to affect a little bit about how fib is shown. So let's make a checkbox. We're going to make this, let's just put whether we're going to show in bold. So fib is bold. Okay. And we're going to have an Unchange. And Unchange is going to handle the is bold change, which we're going to need to write. So I'm just copying this, handle, whoops, I have 3 of them, that's no good. Okay. So what do we want to do? We want to add some more state information. So this more state information is going to be some information about whether we're bold. Okay, so let's just say is bold, set is bold, use state false. So we're going to start out not bold. And then we handle it on bold change, and what I'm going to do, we're going to basically say if, let's just see what that value is. Okay, so let's just run this and look in the console. Oh, we have an error. Forget to close that. Handle is bold changed. Handle is bold change. Handle is bold change. All right, there we go. And it's on. So for a checkbox, it's actually in checked. So let's look. Yep, okay. So what we're going to do then is we are going to set is bold to e.target.checked. So it'll match whatever the checkbox says. Add a label for the checkbox. So let's go ahead and add a label for the checkbox. So the way we can do that is that we can actually just create a label and have the checkbox inside it. So we don't have to use this for syntax. So we can just put this label in here and have, let's say, bold the result. So like this. So let's just try this. And you can see we can click on the checkbox, or we can click on the associated label, although it's selecting it, which is not what I'd really like. Okay. So now, as we are rendering the fib, let's just go ahead and in this div here, we will bold the result if our props bold is true. So I will go ahead and do a span with the class equals bold and bold. So it'll be the string bold, or it should be nothing. So that's our span. We'll end our span. We can go ahead and change our CSS to be bold. Now, this is not a very good name. Just make this emphasize. Let's rename this from bold to emphasize, because bold really says how it should be done, and emphasize just says what should be done, and so that's much nicer. Okay, so let's rename this in our refactor to is emphasize. We'll say emphasized. Okay, and we've got a little bit of a problem here because it's not actually working, so let's look and see. If we inspect this, the span doesn't have a class. So let's just look. And maybe that's because I didn't say class name. Let's try that again. Nope. And this should be emphasized. And there we go. Okay, that's pretty good. We need a space between the is and the number. Let's just fix that. And fib is just add a non-breaking space. Okay, now here's what I want to consider. If we put 38 in here, we decided it takes a little bit of time, and it does. And now, if I turn off the bolding, it still takes quite a bit of time. But the fact is, we'd like it not to have to recalculate that. So we are going to look at memoization. All right, so let's talk now about another React hook called useMemo. So this is memoization, that is saving the result of expensive calls. So I'm going to actually move nth fib outside of here. It could be inside as well, it doesn't really matter. Right, this is still working. So what do we want to take advantage of the fact here is basically we don't want to recalculate the nth fib. I'm going to pull this out here into a constant. So we don't want to recalculate this Fibonacci value if n hasn't changed. Okay. So the way to do that, I suppose we could try and keep some state information about the last n was and the last value, but what we could do is instead do a useMemo. So useMemo takes a function that will do your calculation. Okay. Let's add in useMemo here. Okay, so this is a function that will return the nth Fibonacci based on props.in. And let's just go ahead. If we use this as is, we can see here we have a lint warning. useMemo does nothing when called with only one argument. When we say does nothing, it's useless when done with only one argument. So this is still going to recalculate whether props.n changes or whether the props.emphasize changes, basically anytime we need to re-render. And we want it to only recalculate if the value it depends on has changed. So we pass an array of values. Okay. So we're going to pass in props.in. So what this basically says, what we're basically doing is looking at nth and saying either explicit arguments that gets passed to it, or if there were any implicit references to properties or state or anything else, then we would provide them in this dependency array. So the dependency array, basically, the use of this, I mean, if we had a good enough compiler, we wouldn't need to explicitly provide this dependency array. It could figure it out from the arguments we're passing and any uses of it within nth. But in this case, we do have to provide it explicitly. So this says if n changes, right, if this value changes, then it will recall this nth fib. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and see how this works. So we're here. The class name was false. That you can see here we put a nice little error message. It says if we want to conditionally emit the class name, then do, instead of condition n value, use the ternary operator, so it becomes undefined. So let's fix that just so we don't. So here, okay, and now we don't get an error. And now we've got our third fib is this. Let's try 38. Okay, 38 is good. Bold, unbold, bold, unbold. Okay, not bad. If we go back to 7, 7 takes a little while. Bold, unbold, bold, unbold. If we go back to 8, yeah, it's got to recompute it. So, okay, so what the useMemo is used for is if we have an expensive operation when we're doing rendering. And so this allows us to do what's called memoization. Right? Memoization is the idea of saving the result of an expensive computation. And the important piece here is we provide this dependency array. So that tells the useMemo basically that as long as the values in the dependency array haven't changed, then it can use the saved version. That is the memoized version of calling this routine. So anytime we have something that's an expensive operation, we can go ahead and protect it with a useMemo. It's really important, though, that we provide the right dependencies. Let's just look what happens if we get rid of this dependency. Right? It says there's a missing dependency props.in. Let's put instead props.emphasize to see what happens here. Okay, and it says, hey, it's missing. Okay, so it is actually done a little computation to figure out that it's using props.in, but it's not being passed. So if we provide props.in, there we go. So that is the use of memoization.